All right, so thank you all for coming to this discourse on critical theory and the human condition, a discourse among scholars, and we have an august group of scholars here to discuss these very pertinent issues of the past, the present, and of course the future of the human condition from the perspective of critical theory and critical social theory. And so I'd like to welcome you all, and those who are joining us, and also those who will be joining us later when we put this on YouTube. We hope this is a fruitful discussion and that everybody learns something from. My name is Dustin Bird. I'm a professor, associate professor for philosophy, religion, and Arabic at Olivet College. I'm also the founder and editor-in-chief of Ikperosis Press, which is sponsoring this course, discourse today. And so, without further ado, I hand it over to my colleague, Syed Javed Miri.
Thank you very much, Dustin. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope today we will have a good discussion. As Dustin mentioned, we are going to talk about critical theory and the human condition. We were supposed to be actually 6 contributors, but Alexander Azadgan had some other things to do, so he declined. So we are going to start with Professor Rudolf Siebert. The floor is yours, Professor.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I would like to make a little contribution to the critical theory and the human condition. The critical theory was, of course, the cover name for Marxism originally. So they were mainly concerned with class problems. But then another problem came up, and these were the race problems in the form of anti-Semitism. But they never really got to the gender problem. So I have extended somehow the critical theory to include the gender problem as well. And I would just like to read a few lines from a lengthy paper on Marx and Freud, Horkheimer and Adorno, Beyond the Historical Gender Struggle. How much time do I have?
15 minutes each of the contributors, then we will have another 5 or 10 minutes for debates and discussions.
Very good. So early on, Max Horkheimer, the founder of the critical theory of society on the Frankfurt School, informed by Immanuel Kant and Hegel and Marx and Freud, had personal contact with the Freudian psychoanalysis, essentially concerned with the gender struggle, when he visited as patient the Freudian psychoanalyst and later friend Karl Landauer, who was to help him to speak freely and without notes in the lecture halls of the Johann Wolfgang von Goethe Universität in Frankfurt. The analysis was short because Horkheimer and his beloved wife Maiden were such happy people and thus were no longer in need of treatment by Landauer. A few years later, the Jewish psychoanalyst Landauer was starved to death in the Nazi concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. From the start, Max Horkheimer was, as director of the Institute of Social Research, popularly called the Café Marx, on the campus of the Frankfurt University, in continual touch and contact with the nearly Freudian Psychoanalytical Institute and the psychoanalyst Erich Fromm and Karl Landauer. Later, both institutes merged in one building, the Café Marx, and Fromm became a member of the Institute of Social Research, and Landauer became the director and leader of its psychological department or section. The building was confiscated by the National Socialist Cultural Minister in 1933 and was bombed out by the American Air Force in 1944, 1945, and rebuilt after the war, after World War II, with the financial support of the city of Frankfurt and of the military government of the American occupational zone of Germany. Horkheimer and Fromm combined, like Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, Wilhelm Reich, and Alexander and Margaret Mitscherlich, and much later Slavoj Žižek, Sigmund Freud, and Karl Marx, psychoanalysis and political economics and sociology. Marx, who had no psychology, was supplemented by Freud's psychoanalysis, and Freud, who had no sociology, was complemented by Marx's historical materialism. Horkheimer's Institute of Social Research combined individual and society, personal autonomy, and universal solidarity. The same was true of the Critical Theory of Religion and Society, CTRS, or dialectical religiology, which we derived from, including Dustin, derived from Horkheimer's Critical Theory of Society since the end of World War II. For several years, a deep friendship bound together Erich Fromm and only with the existentialist and socialist theologian Paul Tillich, but also with Horkheimer. When Fromm left the Institute of Social Research, which had migrated to the Columbia University in New York from fascist Germany, because of his financial and other reasons, for instance, his revisionism concerning Marx and Freud, that meant for Horkheimer and the Institute the greatest loss in comparison to other scholars who had departed. While Horkheimer was mainly concerned with class and distribution of wealth problems, he was also interested in issues of cultural recognition or respect, like race issues, for instance, anti-Semitism, and generational issues or gender issues like the battle of the sexes through the centuries. According to CTRS, men and women were located in different classes: nobility, bourgeoisie, proletariat, and civil society. Men may be related closer to women in their own class than to men in a different class. Women may be related closer to men in their own class than to women in a different class. Thus, class struggle and gender struggle may also be interconnected. Men and women did not only need recognition and respect, but also an income in civil society, one equal to that of men. According to DR, that means the dialectical religiology, while Hegel built his gigantic philosophical system on the idea, as well as on all five human potentials, language and memory, work and tool, sexual love, struggle for recognition, and community, his anti-systematic disciple Marx, after giving up his teacher's idea, grounded his dialectical materialism in the evolutionary universal of work and tool, and the likewise anti-systematic Freud based his psychoanalysis on the human potential of sexual love. While Hegel was the greatest idealist, Marx and Freud were materialists. While Friedrich Engels, the friend of Marx, considered all religions to be idealistic, Hegel showed that Christianity was not only idealistic, but also materialistic through the incarnation of the Logos in Jesus of Nazareth. That was true of all positive religions insofar as they all had some kind of an incarnation. Hinduism, the religion of imagination in the Bhagavad Gita, or Judaism, the religion of sublimity in the Torah, or Islam, the religion of law in the Holy Quran. Thus, in 2021 years, there existed in American and European civil society a bourgeois, Marxian and Freudian, as well as a legitimate religious, Hindu, Jewish, Islamic, or Christian materialism. Like the Abrahamic religions and German idealism, the anti-systematic Horkheimer united the sense of for reality with the imperturbable holding on to the idea, the very opposite of the reality, and to the insight into the impossibility to imagine or name the absolute or the unconditional. While Freud looked favorably on the Marxist-Leninist revolution going on in Russia in the 1920s, his biological determinism prevented him from becoming a Marxist because of man's aggressive or death instinct. Even if the class struggle would end victoriously with the proletariat, other forms of conflict would continue. For instance, the battle of the sexes or the races or the generations and so on. The critical theory of religion, which was also like Horkheimer's critical theory of society based on Kant and Hegel, Marx and Freud, traced the historical development from the original relative union of the genders under the primitive communism of hunters, fishermen, and food gatherers through their antagonism in terms of matriarchy and patriarchy to their possible reunion in terms of not only a formal, but rather a material, egalitarian social democracy of brothers and sisters, not only in civil society, in political state and history, but also in the family and in religion. Freud based and concentrated his psychoanalysis and therapy on organism, including form, assimilation, and species process, and on the connected psychic apparatus, including id, ego, and superego, and on the family, including marriage, familial property, and education of children, as the source of the gender conflict between parents and children, father and son, son and father, wife and husband, son and mother, daughter and mother, and so on. The class struggle for equal distribution of the surplus value included the gender conflict, as well as the race struggle and the generational battle for equal cultural recognition and respect, and the environmental fight for species survival on this planet, but not vice versa. Not only women, but also LGBT plus communities participated in the historical gender struggle and fought more and more successfully for gender identity, equality, and justice, while secular as well as religious, exclusive, right-wing, authoritarian, and totalitarian populists continued to consider them to be perverse and decadent expressions of a declining culture and civilization, and to resist them with more or less violent identity policies and politics, as the fascists had done in the first half of the 20th century. Not only Jews, gypsies, and communists, men and women were murdered in the fascist concentration camps in Eastern and Central Europe in the 20th century, but also homosexuals. The Simon Wiesenthal Center reported on June 29, 2021 that the founder, Simon Wiesenthal, was one of the first to discuss what happened to homosexuals before and during the Holocaust, and about the anti-gay edict that the Catholic Heinrich Himmler, the fabricator of the Jewish Shoah, enacted in 1937 in Nazi Berlin. The Simon Wiesenthal Center, usually devoted to the fight against anti-Semitism, remembered nevertheless during the Gay Pride Month, June 2021, those gay men who were persecuted and murdered together with Jews during the Holocaust. The gender struggle was most closely connected not only with the class struggle, but also with the fight of the LGBT plus communities as a whole for equality and justice. The gender struggle took place most passionately, not only in the secular, but also in the religious sphere. Jesuit Father Mitch mentioned in a public discourse with a Hungarian priest in June 2021 in preparation of the Eucharistic Congress in Budapest in August 2021, the terror of communism in Catholic Hungary, and even the dangers of recent neoliberalism for the faith, but forgot completely that Catholic Hungary, like Catholic Spain and Catholic Portugal and Catholic Croatia and Catholic Italy and half Catholic Germany and so on, had also been patriarchal and fascist and anti-Semitic and an ally of Nazi Germany in the Second World War. I personally witnessed 300 Hungarian officers fighting most fanatically with German troops against General Patton's tank army in the Battle of Aschaffenburg on Easter 1945, and that they deserted only when the battle was finally lost. In spite of the fact that here existed an all too late papal encyclical letter which condemned fascism as pagan, no fascist leader was ever excommunicated or deprived of receiving communion. Not only was Adolf Hitler never excommunicated, a mass was even celebrated for him in all German Catholic parishes after he had ordered people to be executed up to his last day, and after he and his wife Eva had committed suicide, both having been educated by Catholic priests and nuns in Austria. All socialists and communists were automatically excommunicated. While the Vatican had concordance with all fascist states, there was no agreement with the Soviet Union. While Catholic communities helped innocent Jews during World War II, the Vatican also helped criminal Nazi leaders to flee to South America after the war. When in 2020, the Vatican reached an agreement with the communist government in China in order to make good what had been done wrong through one-sided policies in the 20th century, Fox News and the EWTN, the Eternal Word, and the whole Catholic right in the United States and in Europe were outraged and protested widely. The patriarchal gender struggle continued most recently in June 2021 in the religious sphere in the United States, while the Republican Party seemed to have turned fascist and socialism was gaining popularity in the polls, resisted most fanatically by the secular exclusive right-wing populist Fox News and the likewise exclusive right-wing populist Catholic EWTN, which both shared even the same contributor and anchorman, Raymond Arroyo. Women would still not yet be ordained to the priesthood in the patriarchal authoritarian Roman Catholic Church as late as in June 2021, as Jews had already modified their patriarchal attitude and had ordained female rabbis for quite some time, and Protestant churches had given up their patriarchy to a large extent and had ordained female ministers for even much longer. Do I still have some time?
Probably just a few more minutes.
Few more minutes?
Yes.
You say stop. According to Max Horkheimer, the initiator of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, explained in his theory about the Oedipus complex and about the Electra complex, the identification of the boy with the father out of their love for the mother. Freud based his psychoanalysis on the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles in Athens, a chain of gender crimes. The tragedies reflected on the level of the absolute spirit of culture, of art, and of religion, namely the Greek religion of fate and beauty, the real struggle of the genders on the level of the objective spirit of the Athenian family, civil society, city-state, and history. According to Aeschylus, Agamemnon, Thyestes seduced Atreus' wife. Atreus killed Thyestes' young children and gave him them as meat. Helen forsook her husband and went to Troy with Paris. Agamemnon, in order to promote the Trojan War, sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia. Aegisthus and Clytemnestra murdered Agamemnon after his return from Troy. Orestes killed Aegisthus and his mother Clytemnestra with the support of his sister Electra. However, for his matricide, Orestes was pursued throughout Greece in revenge by the female spirits, the Erinyes, until he came to Athens, where Athena, who had, according to Greek patriarchal imagination, come out of the head of Zeus, as Eve had come, according to Jewish patriarchal imagination, from the rib of Adam, and atoned for and reconciled Orestes for the price of a patriarchy in which men protected woman and child, and woman served men. Agamemnon represented the arrival of the patriarchy, Clytemnestra the return of matriarchy, and Orestes the re-establishment of patriarchy. According to Sophocles, after Oedipus had returned from his exile, into which he had been sent as a boy by his parents because of an ominous oracle, and after he had solved the riddle of the Sphinx on the marketplace of Theban, and thus had redeemed the city, he killed unconsciously and unintentionally his father when he blocked his way to the city, and then married unconsciously and unintentionally his mother Jocasta, retaking the patriarchal power position of his father. Tiresias, a blind prophet, revealed the gender tragedy. The chorus of Theban elders commented on it. At least since the Axis age, the battle of the sexes raged on under the patriarchy, interrupted admittedly by the armistice of marriage, family, partnership, and friendship. This armistice, however, broke down in the West more and more in higher and higher rates of different expressions and forms of the battle of the sexes, like divorce, adultery, abortion, birth control, homosexuality, lesbianism, shortly LGBTQ plus communities, which continued to be discriminated against heavily by right-wing Catholics and Southern Baptists up to June 2021 and so on, until they reached in the 20th and 21st century a level never seen before since the late Roman Empire.
All right.
Do I still have a minute?
Yeah, if you get one more minute, that'll work.
Okay, one more paragraph. However, in the view of the DR, that means dialectical geology, not only Athens was aware of the historical gender struggle, but also Jerusalem. In Jewish history, the struggle of the genders reached its climax with two courageous women. The book of Judith told the story of the defeat of Nebuchadnezzar's army through a woman single-handed assassination of their commander. The book was written about 100 BC. The theme of the book East Esther was similarly the deliverance of the Jewish nation by the actions of a woman. The Hebrew version was probably written about 300 BC. The Hebrew prophet Micah stated concerning the gender conflict in the neighborhood and in the family, put quotation, put no trust in a neighbor, have no confidence in a friend. To the woman who shares your bed, do not open your mouth. For son insults father, daughter defies mother, daughter-in-law defies mother-in-law. A man's enemies are those of his own household. Among them, the best is like a briar, the most honest a hedge of thorn. Today will come their ordeal from the north. Now is the time of their confusion. Rabbi Jesus spoke of the dissension in the family following the prophet Micah. Quotation, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. It is not peace I have come to bring, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. Or again, do you suppose that I am here to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. The father divided against the son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. According to Jesus, there were men who were castrated, eunuchs in the contemporary Jewish and Roman culture. Quotation, there are eunuchs born that way from their mother's womb. There are eunuchs made by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves that way for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. According to CTRS, only Essenes made themselves into eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of God. According to the context, Jesus used the Essenes statement not in order to establish a celibate priesthood, but rather in order to tell divorced people not to get married again. Jesus did this after he had criticized Moses' permission of divorce because the Israelites had not been teachable in spite of the fact that in the beginning it was not so, according to the will of the Creator God in the Genesis. While according to the book Genesis, Sodom was destroyed because of the homosexuality, and while according to the book Leviticus, homosexuals had to be sentenced to death and executed, in spite of the fact that according to the prophet Isaiah, Sodom had been destroyed because its rich women did not share their wealth with the poor. And according to the Jesus teaching, Sodom had been destroyed because of a lack of hospitality towards strangers. In Jesus' view, the man of Sodom could repent and be forgiven easier than the man of Sidon, who did not repent after he had preached to them. Also, Jesus taught, you have learned how it was said, you must love your neighbor and hate your enemy. According to the dialectical religiology, the quotation was from Leviticus 19:18. The enemy to be hated could be inside as well as outside the family. However, the second part of this commandment was not in the written Hebrew law. It was an Aramaic Essene way of saying you do not have to love your enemy. Also, this rule was valid inside as well as outside the family. The Greek tragedies found their climax and their final resolution in the ultimate Christian tragedy, in which the Son, born without the original sin of patricide, redeemed through his own sacrifice the world from his sin and sins. While when Jesus was executed, his mother and his disciple John were present, the rest of the family, his father Joseph and his 4 brothers and his sisters, as well as most of his disciples, were missing. Judas having betrayed him, Peter having denied him 3 times, and all the other disciples having fled after 3 years of intense teaching. That may
Thank
be
you
it.
very much, Professor. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It was really inspirational. Thank you. We will get back to you. Now we have, I don't see Farid. Farid is here. Hello, Farid. Are you around?
I'm here.
Okay, Farid, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay, let me maybe begin with something that I say to my students when I teach many of the courses that I teach, and this refers to how sociologists understand the human condition, especially classical 19th century social theorists, or those thinkers who are said to be founders of social theory, although they did not think of themselves as sociologists or social theorists. And Marx would be a good example. But what I want to say is that, and all of you would be familiar with this, students, and that would include us when we were students, we used to have this saying about getting out into the real world, when we're in university, we think of ourselves as being in an artificial environment, and when we graduate, we get out into the real world, right? Now, I tell my students that that's not true, because the world out there is a fake world. At least in the university, you can be, you can be close to what you feel you are. You can speak if you make use of the freedom that's given to you. You can be true to yourself. You can be critical. You can talk about things as they are. Once you get out into that so-called real world, that is where you have to manage impressions. You have to, hide your real feelings. You have to, play politics. You have to be politically correct, etc., etc. So that's not the real world, actually. And I think the idea of this, being a fake world, is captured by the by 19th century thinkers such as Marx, Weber, Durkheim, Schopenhauer, of course, Erich Fromm, Freud, and others. But as far as social theory is concerned, I think the three main contributors to the idea of problematic modernity. You have the idea of alienation from Marx. You have the idea of anomy from Durkheim. Durkheim, of course, was influenced by Schopenhauer. And you have the idea of the iron cage of rationality from Max Weber. But the point is, I think all three of them, together with many other thinkers of the 19th century and early 20th century, considered that the earlier Enlightenment promise of freedom, of liberating humans from nature, from evil, the promise of the ability to rationally construct just economic and political systems and legal systems, the idea of harnessing nature for man's good. I think these, by the 19th century, there was the idea that these promises were not delivered or could not be delivered. That even though man, and literally men, were in the process of dismantling authoritarian and unjust, economic and political systems, and democracy was being constructed. At the same time, humans had enslaved themselves in other ways. Humans had lost freedom in other ways. They were not able to realize the human potential. This is the idea behind Marx's notion of alienation. Humans were enslaved to desire. This is the idea of anomy. Or humans had enslaved themselves, or found themselves trapped in an iron cage of what's Weber called the iron cage of rationality. So I think these ideas capture the thinking behind thinkers from the 19th century onwards about the human condition. And these ideas continue to be expressed in different ways in modern culture, in popular culture. For example, I think the Matrix trilogy, the three Matrix movies, very well express that problem and reflect that problem. The Matrix is an allegory for alienated society, for the inability of humans to realize their potential as human beings. And you have the idea expressed in not just theoretical, but also in philosophical and even literary works of novelists and poets and artists. Now, what I want to do is to relate this to the critique of modernity that comes from the side of Muslim philosophers and thinkers and activists, where there has been a concern which overlaps to some extent the concern of the 19th century European thinkers, and that concern has been with the problem of secularism. So you have a discourse among Muslim scholars who say that the problematic aspect of the human condition today in modernity is secularism, and there I think there is some convergence, or rather, maybe not correct to say convergence, it's more correct to say there's some borrowing from Max Weber, because they agree with Max Weber that the modern world is disenchanted. But they see the problem of disenchantment as a problem of, of the domination of a secular worldview, of an atheistic worldview. Now, without going into all the details regarding their critique, what I want to say is that I think that their critique is misplaced because they are locating the problem in irreligiosity. Now, whatever our own personal religious beliefs may be, and in my case, I happen to be religious, but I feel that the problem of modernity is not to do with atheism. It's not to do with the dominance of the secular outlook on life per se, but rather has to do with the problem of nihilism. And what I find interesting is that the Muslim scholars who are concerned with the human condition had hardly ever taken an interest in the problem of nihilism. They were more interested in secularism. And when it came to secularism, they were more concerned with the problem of the secular state rather than the human condition. So it was more a problem for them of basically of the world run by atheists, right? And the lack of religion in public life. So this for them is a problem of secularism. So I find it interesting that the human condition, the human pathology of the modern world, that relates to the idea that is related to the idea of the world as being meaningless and absurd, that there's nothing more to the universe than its materialist nature and so on and so forth, is not something that had been picked up upon by Muslim critics of modernity. And so to me, this is something that that needs to be addressed. Of course, there are some Muslims who have. I think one example was the late Ottoman thinker Badiüzzaman Said Nursi, who was concerned with the problem of despair in the modern world, who was concerned with the problem of disenchantment, was concerned with how modern life failed to create meaning for people, and without him, he did not use the terms nihilism, but he was concerned with what European scholars by the 19th century recognized as kind of existential nihilism, as well as a moral nihilism. And I think that part of the reason for the failure of Muslims in the 20th century and even the 21st century, to deal or to think of the problem of the human condition in terms of nihilism rather than secularism, or perhaps even to see nihilism as one of the extreme consequences of secularism. The part of the reason for that failure to see that has to do with the lack of interest among Muslim scholars in European philosophy. in European literature. And I mean, you know, for example, many of you would know that it is only certain philosophers who have captured the interest of Muslim scholars. For example, I think two examples would be Heidegger and Kant, especially in the Shiite world. But the works of many other thinkers and writers, certainly I know in my part of the world, in Malaysia and Indonesia, there's virtually no interest in the philosophers, the existentialist philosophers. There's virtually no interest in the Russian thought from the 19th century onwards, in Turgenev, in Dostoevsky, in Gogol and others. So the themes that they picked up on that relate to our topic, this topic of nihilism, have not become have not been paid attention to by many Muslim scholars. If we think more about the problem of existential nihilism and moral nihilism or ethical nihilism, and if Muslim scholars perhaps paid more attention to the thinking and the works in the West, in particular the works of Christian scholars, they would see some parallels and some possibilities of borrowing ideas. I think one way to think in a more systematic way about the problem is to think in terms of responses to nihilism. I mean, once the problem is recognized, once it is recognized that the problem of the human condition is not secularism per se, but rather nihilism, then we can think of at least three responses. One is to escape the modern world, and of course, an extreme way of escape is suicide, right? But we know, or we can see attempts of people escaping the meaninglessness and absurdities of the modern world by trying to, for example, as they say in the West, living off the grid, right? And now you even have reality shows that present and describe the lives of such people who are living off the grid. Of course, it's not an option for the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people do not have the resources and the ability to actually live off the grid. And certainly suicide is not a reasonable option, although it is an option taken by people. But escape doesn't seem to be, the way to go. And the issue of the meaninglessness of life, yeah. When I talk to my students, I tell them, don't be in a hurry to leave the university and enter that so-called real world, because it's, as I said earlier, it's a fake world, but also that you start to live your alienated life in earnest once you leave the university. And I explain to them that, the vast majority of people on this earth work in areas that they have little interest in. The vast majority of people work for others. There's little self-direction in their work. there's little, intellectual exertion, little creativity, little scope for them to realize their potential and their interests in their work. Very few people, and I think we, should count ourselves, of course, lucky in the sense that the kind of work we do, we are more self-directed than less self-directed. We, although we, we are basically our own bosses. We teach what we want to teach, and we do a lot of what we want to do. A lot of the work that we do, that we earn salaries for, is work that we would do anyway, right? But then the vast majority of people are not working that way in the world. So there is, that serious problem of alienation. So one response to that, of course, is escape. The other response is to embrace it, right? To embrace the meaninglessness. And the example that I like to give my students is, is from the Marquis de Sade. And they're always interested to learn that the idea of sadism comes from from those who reflected on the teachings of the Marquis de Sade, who considered that morality was merely human social constructions, and that breaking the moral codes was an affirmation of life. That if one had the ability to do so, one should do so. Right. So the idea of of sadism, of course, comes from his own thinking and from his own actions. So he embraced the meaninglessness and absurdity of life. But then thirdly, the third response is once having recognized the meaninglessness of life, was to accept that there is that problem, but not to embrace it, but rather to engage in meaning making. Yeah, and I think this was certainly an approach adopted from the 19th century onwards by many Christian philosophers and thinkers and artists, and also to some extent Muslims, such as Said Nursi in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and indeed other Muslim scholars and thinkers of the 20th and 21st centuries. So in other words, there's recognition of the problem of absurdity and meaninglessness, and that the task of man, of humans, and the task of religion is meaning making, to make meaning in life. How that is done, of course, is another matter, right? Simply affirming the existence of God, simply affirming the absolute nature of morality, simply affirming the belief that morality is God-made and not man-made, doesn't result in meaning making, although it is often regarded as the solution. But this is the condition in which we find ourselves. You've got, on the one hand, the problem of meaninglessness, and this is not merely a philosophical problem; it's an existential problem. It's a problem of real life, because the vast majority of people in the world, and it's certainly true of the Muslim world, are leading these meaningless lives. They are working from hand to mouth, from paycheck to paycheck, if they have paychecks, but certainly from hand to mouth. They are not. They live under regimes that are extremely brutal and cruel and corrupt, with seemingly no ability to change their political system, to change their regimes, to bring to power more ethical leadership. So that is happening. At the same time, the scholars are telling them that the problem is irreligiosity and atheism, right? Not dealing with the actual problem, what to me is the actual problem of nihilism, which cannot be equated with atheism or secularism. So I think that the discussion on secularism, the critique of secularism, has to some extent an ideological function, because it functions to gloss over the real problem. Merely calling for religious order does not solve the problem of nihilism. After all, according to the Russian philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev, there's such a thing as religious nihilism, right? In which you have a conception of God as overseeing a regime that is meaningless, and therefore anything becomes possible. So it's not only when you have the death of God that anything or everything is possible, but even with God, anything is possible. And this I think guides the thinking of Muslim terrorists who believe in God, genuinely believe in God, but the kind of God that they believe in is a God that believes in revenge, that distinguishes between believers and non-believers, that considers the blood of non-believers as halal, as kosher, if I may use the term. So I think there is the possibility of a religious form of nihilism. So this, I think, suggests that the problem is not atheism and secularism. So these are just a few, ideas that I've been thinking about, and I think they're very preliminary ideas. I've not been able to be as systematic as I would like to be, but hope for a discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farid. It was very inspirational. Thank you very much. I enjoyed a lot. Mehdi, if you are around, the table is yours. Mehdi is not here?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah. Hi there, everybody. Again.
Hello, Mehdi.
Well, thank you, both Rudolph and Said Farid. I learned too much from you guys that I just don't want to talk. I just want to make sure that I'm observing all of this. This is fantastic. I mean, on the one hand, we did so much on the 19th century and of course then 20th century post and World War II, and then of course Farid's discussion of nihilism, alienation. That has been a human condition, it seems, for eternity, at least as long as we've been able to think about ourselves in the context of a social reality. I really don't have much to say, except that I thought maybe, given the current reality in terms of the environmental degradation, that somehow we think about our responsibilities as human beings, as individuals, as agencies, and combating the structural damage to the environment, to the human, and the creation of what we have today, which is a horrible environmental degradation, a human condition. We have a world in which a planet which is 71% water, 29% land, and not all of that land is suitable for human habitation. 71% of water is packed with salt and pollutants, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and the aftermath of that. And only 1% of that total surface water is suitable for human consumption, only 1%. And we have seen historically that people have been killing each other for water. We have water wars, just to mention Syria and Yemen are two examples that started because of the shortage of water and because of environmental degradation. Granted, a big part of it is due to drought, due to, and even drought, one could say, is man-made because of the changing temperature. Temperature that has increased 3%, something that 3 degrees, pardon me, that we have not experienced for the past 3 million years. And that 3 degrees increase in global temperature certainly can wreak havoc because it really dismantles all the organic connections that exist between living organisms, humans, and the natural world. And I think one of the concepts that was so descriptive of what was really beginning to happen was Karl Marx's metabolic rift. He borrowed from the German chemist Justus von Liebig. Although Marx did not really invent that, but again is attributed to in the context of what he was saying, that yeah, he was talking about metabolic rift. That is that disconnect between human beings, or a separation, a sort of a antagonism, it seems, between component parts of the organic reality. And so the Industrial Revolution, which was urban-centered industrialization, and of course increasingly became global, created an environment in which it seems that we have to really pause. Today, from the 21st century, looking back, we're thinking that, so why is it that not that many people discuss that issue? Why was it dismissed, what Karl Marx and von Liebig and others were concerned about? Or in fact, I'm not sure even the idea that Catholics say, there were some Catholic saints that were really environmental saints. St. Francis of Assisi, for instance, is considered to be one of those saints that was concerned with the environment. And in the Persian culture, we also have this great reverence for rivers and oceans and the land and reproduction, a healthy connection between human beings and the environment. And then we have the speaking of native knowledge or indigenous knowledge, I consider the Indian diet, vegetarian diet, as an example of really that kind of knowledge dealing with the environment. With the vegetarian diet, of course, comes not really respect for cows, but that cows are worth a lot more alive than dead, because you can use them in the agriculture, but also you can use them as a source of energy, meaning the cow manure is used, of course, to generate gas, which is then shipped to or sent to people's kitchens. And that was something that was learned, by the way, from 1950s and 60s after the Green Revolution, with the Kennedy's initiative, the developmentalism, although it had negative consequences as well, a lot of other places. At any rate, what I was thinking, that perhaps if we were to think in terms of the critical theory's emphasis on agency, structure, relationship, that we could introduce the concept of praxis into this, a praxis that is action, that follows a theoretical, an abstract concept. That if we follow this praxis, notion of praxis, as we continue to behave in a committed, healthy, responsible fashion, then we can learn from those actions again to reconsider our views of the world, our abstract constructs. And in that dialectical fashion, within the context of praxis, then we can, of course, make the world better. But the question then becomes, is somewhat related to what Farid was talking about, nihilism. I personally think that is the structure is so overwhelming. The structure, global capitalism in particular, is so overwhelming and has been so overwhelming that it has rendered agency almost, so ineffective. And so the question is, how do we get that back? How do we go back to becoming agency and confronting a structure in a fashion that is beneficial in the long haul? How do we create an environment in which people can think about the consequence of their actions, be it in the form of religion, ideologies, philosophies, et cetera, I think critical approach to this has a lot to offer, more than anything else, because I have seen when there is a sort of a non-critical or uncritical approach to these problems. Let me give you an example. When dealing with, let's say, pollution and environmental degradation that we have, or all the problems associated with industrialization, rampant industrialization, unbridled capitalism, no regulation whatsoever when it comes to industry across the globe. In fact, it has overwhelmed the nation states to the point that really they can't even complain to anybody while they see things out there where people are dying. As a result of the industrialization that is out of control. So I think the uncritical part, it could be challenged by, in their own game, so to speak. In other words, when people talk about, well, we have to make capitalism more humane. What does that mean? You want to make capitalism more humane? Tell me what that means, actually. How do you prevent the industrial damage to the environment to the point that we can't drink water, that little existing water that exists that is polluted, and also the air that we cannot breathe? Look at China, look at India, look at a lot of other places. Look at Tehran, look at Jakarta, look at Mexico City. All of these industrial centers that are really developed because of the global capitalism's power to decide for the nation states. And in addition to humane capitalism, they also talk about, value capitalism. Let's make people believe that they're part of the system. Okay, so how do you do that again if people are living from paycheck to paycheck, they don't have enough to eat, and they cannot really have anything to say about the decisions made in corporate boardroom? How do you make that possible? So by questioning the suggestions from the uncritical or non-critical approach to this, we can really make a difference in terms of, at least that's what I'm hoping, make a difference in terms of changing the direction. Is it too late to change the direction? You know, you look at people who are living next to the tire incinerators, absolutely it's too late. There is no hope. We look at people who live from paycheck to paycheck and they can't say anything because of the environment in which they work. And if they say something, they lose their jobs. And that is global, by the way. It's not just limited to some third world countries that the government is utterly powerless. When we talk about environmental racism, we talk about, again, the poverty, the criminal activities that occur because of the environmental degradation. All of these things need to be looked at in terms of in an organic fashion, and all component parts must be related to one another. You can't talk about poverty without talking about the environmental degradation. We can't talk about students being disinterested in the world without talking about environmental degradations, because if there is really no hope for tomorrow, because by virtue of their control over the media and the educational institutions, the capital has the power to change people's mind about their own condition. We know that. That's called alienation, right? Estrangement, right? Through reification, thingifying everything, through commodity fetishism. People are mesmerized. They don't really know where to turn to. So they take it all inward. And there is really no outward expression of that anger and that alienation, that frustration. And so the question then is, how do we challenge all of this energy towards something better? If we have poverty, if we have environmental racism, we have patriarchy around the globe. How do we deal with this problem that is completely out of hand? Some 12 years ago, we told we have 12 years to do something about the environment. Otherwise, we're going to drown, or we're going to die of heat, or a lot of other things. And it's been 3 years since somebody proposed the Green Revolution, the new Green Deal, a representative in U.S. House of Representatives. But then, of course, it was ridiculed, it was dismissed. They employed just about everybody, including individuals in the academia, philosophers, politicians, and social activists, to go against that very notion that it's possible to change things around. I think that the idea that on the one hand, we should really encourage outside of the centers of global capitalism, going back to the indigenous knowledge, how to deal with the environment. I mentioned India as an example, for instance, the regard for the environment, that to the point that some people again consider a cow to be sacred. That's not the issue. The issue is the cow is certainly part of the environment that could be used a lot much better than that we're using it in the West or other places, slaughtering them for meat, and of course, and raising them more because we need more meat. Indigenous culture in Latin America certainly can help us counter the impact of industrial development. But it seems to me that it is not possible to do much without really a sort of a comprehensive reorganization of the global economic system, and that requires, of course, unionization and the power of labor to confront capital. It requires an understanding and a mindset that whatever happens anywhere in the world is not going to leave you untouched. It's going to affect you no matter where you are. It's just like the air that we breathe. If India is polluted, if China is polluted, that pollution doesn't stay there. That eventually is going to circulate around the globe. And so that collective idea that humanity is at risk and humanity has the power to change things around. The metabolic rift in the 19th century is much more severe these days than ever was, and those guys should be given credit for thinking way ahead of their time. In the 1960s, Rachel Carson, the Silent Spring, some of you are probably familiar with that. She, tried to tell us, that we really are moving towards a catastrophic change in the environment. It is going to be beyond. In 19th century, of course, there were people who were fighting loggers in West Coast, John Muir, a whole bunch of others. By the way, I got them all in my textbook. That there has been a history of trying to counter this onslaught, this idea that somehow nature can continue to take whatever we throw at it. And but today, of course, because of the scarcity of resources in all directions, not only material resources, but intellectual resources, cultural resources, we're not really doing as much. I'm told to recycle. Okay, I'm paying for recycling. I am paying for recycling. In addition to my taxes, I'm also paying for recycling in the city. And then I found out that only 10% of what I put out for recycling is recycled, only 10%. There are tons of plastics shipped overseas. I think Turkey was just an example of recently stopped, taking plastics from Britain because Britain was dumping its plastic into it. It's not just Turkey. It is, unfortunately, it is the export of pollution and environmental degradation through colonialism, imperialism, and in particular now globalization, really, which it is the apex of the imperialism, colonialism, globalization, and trying to create a world in the image of capital, a world in which labor really has no right, in a world in which environment is just that, is for picking and plucking. It is not to consider as a mother nature. It's not to consider as something that we have to have in order to survive. It is almost suicidal to the point of, Farid talked about nihilism, and, Rudolph talked about the Nazi atrocities. All of those things, if we were to think in terms of collective, and if we were to think organically, we wouldn't have these problems. And it seems that every time we're pushed to think inward, to take to the refuge, to our own little world, that we end up with these massive social, economic, and political problems that we were sacrificed and for the benefits of a few. Just a few days ago, was it yesterday? Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, the trillionaire, along with several billionaires, went to space. 11-minute trip cost them $265 million a minute, and then at the same time, the city that thing was launched, 30% of the population lives below poverty line, cannot put food on the table. There is something fundamentally wrong with the decisions. And the question is, well, who should make those decisions? If it's the political structure, the structure in general, political, social, economic, is not involved in channeling or looking, a few years ahead and channeling all the resources to towards constructing a better community, then who should do that? I think, again, going back to Ali Shariati, the reason he emphasized religion was because, look, that is culture. When it comes from religion, people listen, provided that religion is not bastardized, provided that there is some meaning, that there is some connection to that body of thought, and people feel comfortable connecting. It makes them important. Then you can address these social issues. And Rudolph mentioned Catholicism, and Said Farid mentioned the Islamic sages, individuals who have, in many ways, have diverted the attention from the real issues and now towards more of a secularism versus this and that. The point is that if religions and all social institutions play their role adequately, then we wouldn't have all of these problems. And one thing, by the way, is the most important one is the institution of education that has been hijacked right now, as we all know very well. It's a global problem. How much time do we have?
You have 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. Okay. Well, I'll try to stop. So, anyways, what is the solution? On the right, there is this notion that somehow we have to impose taxes on corporations that pollute, and that hasn't worked because they have the political power to stop any kind of taxation. And we also have people who talk about, a revolution, frankly. That is, there has to be a complete overhaul of the political system, economic system. Otherwise, we won't be able to. As long as there is no decoupling of major industries from the political process, political power, we're going to continue to suffer the consequences. And but anyway, so and then in terms of indigenous knowledge, epistemology, indigenous ways of doing things, we have incredible amount of resources. I knew about a scholar, Iranian, Al-Karaji. Al-Karaji was born in Karaj, not far from Tehran. In 11th century, he was the one that actually had a hydraulic theory that actually how to find water. Isn't that interesting? 11th century. This also, there were people who also talked about the connection between human beings and the natural environment in terms of water and the soil. And that continued on well into the 20th century, I think. And today we still have qanat in Iran. And from Western China all the way to Morocco, although Iran seems to be the hub of qanat, there's wells that are connected underground for miles and miles, delivering fresh water to villages in the cities. And sadly, of course, they are disappearing also, partly because of drought, partly because of mismanagement. But we talk about Syria and Yemen as places where people killed each other because of water. But nobody talks about that. But that was the reality of it. That was the reason for it. Today we hear about Ethiopia building a dam. It's called the Renaissance Dam over the Blue Nile. Well, what happens? Well, Sudan and Egypt are now thinking, so what are we going to do with this? Because it deprives them of water. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there was a war between them, Ethiopia on the one hand and the Sudan and Israel on the other. Over the Euphrates and the Euphrates and
Tigris.
Tigris rivers. Thank you. Yeah, there is no water agreement. Central Asia the same way. There is no water agreement. These are all for now respected. But if this drought continues, we're going to see a serious problem, and we're going to see wars all for nothing but water. Just basic human rights, something that we have to have access to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mehdi. Thank you very much. It was really great and inspirational as always.
Thank you.
Now the floor is yours, Dustin. Are you here?
I'm here. Okay, you all can hear me well?
Yep.
Excellent, excellent.
Yes. Professor
So,
Dustin,
Yeah.
you are the blessing for the world.
What's that?
You are the blessing for the world.
There
The
you
floor
go.
is yours.
Isn't that nice?
Just like a
No.
look.
See, that's why he's been glowing all along. See that? I can see that the glow.
It's just the new camera. But yeah, actually, the paper I have to read is actually, it covers a lot of the things that were brought up by both Dr. Siebert and Said Fareed, and as well as Mehdi. So we've all sort of, I think, connected to some of the core issues that currently are plaguing the human condition, or at least determining the human condition. So being that I'm a good reader, I'll just read this paper. So in 1973, Herbert Marcuse responded to Max Horkheimer's admission that the once director of the Institute for Social Research was becoming, quote, old and stupid, as he said he was in a letter to his longtime collaborator. Marcuse wrote back to his friend Horkheimer. He said, "No, Max, we're not getting more and more stupid, but this world is terrible and is becoming ever more terrible beyond our capacity to imagine." This redirection of Horkheimer's pessimism about the human condition, especially in the West, from the individual to society, already confirmed that which Horkheimer knew. In the first half of the 1950s, Horkheimer referred to the condition facing humanity as being the totally dark world, a world wherein the inherent optimism that animated Hegel's dialectical philosophy could no longer be found, especially after the catastrophe of World War II and the Shoah. Likewise, Theodor Adorno, attempting or contemplating the destructive reality of negative dialectics, wherein the grandest of negativities gives birth to no discernible positives, as was the case with Auschwitz, explained that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, because to write the affirmative, the beautiful, the joyful amidst the barbaric only reifies, perpetuates, and camouflages the barbaric. For the first generation of critical theorists, especially in their late lives, the prognosis for the future of the West especially was bleak. Naive optimism about the human condition and the trajectory of the zeitgeist appeared pathologically irrational, a complete and utter denial of reality. Liberal optimism concerning the inherent progress of history seemed to collapse under the weight of history. By the mid-20th century, it was apparent to them that the Enlightenment had failed to realize its universal claims, but rather actualized the freedom of the few instead of the freedom of the many. Marxism, the Enlightenment's inner critique, morphed into authoritarian Stalinism. Substantive culture was either reified into mere commodities and or was wholly replaced by one-dimensionality of homo consumens. Religion was thoroughly neutralized or perversely turned into a feel-good ideology that sanctified capitalism. The individual was replaced by a man indistinguishable from the masses and highly susceptible to the skilled demagogue. The citoyen was replaced by the mass consumer. Humanism was replaced by technology and technocracy. The statesmen of peace, they were replaced by the industrialized capitalist warmongers. And philosophy had become nothing but consolation in the face of the meaninglessness, as Fareed talked about, of modern despair, sharing the same fate as religion, especially Christianity. Seeing all this as the contemporary state of being and reading the trends, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse echoed more the metaphysical pessimism of Schopenhauer than the hopefulness of Kant, Hegel, and Marx, all of whom maintained not only the possibility of progress within history, but the assurance that it was in the process of becoming. It appears that the overwhelming tendencies within modern societies, especially in the capitalist world, were driving the planet into the abyss, and there was very little possibility to steer it into a rational and or more humanistic direction. These developments and many more contributed to the totally dark world that is becoming ever more terrible beyond our capacity to imagine. If we were to take a messianic view of the condition of humanity today, what would we see? Humans continue to build amazing architecture, buildings that surpass the wildest dreams of those who came before us. I just saw recently a news story about the deepest pool of water built in, I think it's maybe the United Arab Emirates or something, where people are snorkeling into what looks like an abandoned building, right? I mean, just amazing stuff that we're just continue to build. Humans continue to explore space by sending people into space, as well as long distance satellites, probes. Humans have built communication systems, clearly, like Zoom, Skype, and FaceTime, which allow us to connect with each other instantaneously from around the globe. The advancement of medicine has cured numerous diseases, healed the injured, has done miracles that only the sent by God could have previously done, such as restoring vision, hearing, the ability to walk, etc. When we look at these great accomplishments, which are accomplishments we can't deny to modern societies, we see that the advancement of instrumental rationality has continued unabated, unencumbered by the moral catastrophes of the present age, as Matthew talked a lot about. Rampant inequality, ecological collapse, the continual exploitation of labor, global sex trafficking, racism, neocolonialism, civil war, xenophobia, and patriarchy, what Dr. Siebert talked about. It appears that when humanity is at its height in terms of its accomplishments via instrumental rationality, it has also perversely lost its grip on its moral compass. It is certainly the case that the ills of humanity have always been the ills of humanity, but at a time when many of those ills can be eliminated, we have chosen hyper-spectacle over solidarity. We have chosen technological phantasmagoria over human care. We have chosen the pleasure principle of forgetting and distraction, turning our backs on our current condition in order to avoid the pain and suffering caused by the reality principle, the facing up to the fact that as a species, we are killing off the very ecosystem that sustains our lives, our families, our societies, our species. An example of this, as Mehdi brought up, at the present moment are the billionaires, including Richard Branson, Bezos, and Elon Musk, as they compete for dominance in space tourism for the rich, wherein billions of dollars are being spent to entertain the wealthy, while back on planet Earth, aridification is happening in the US West. Europe is seeing record flooding, coastal buildings are collapsing, acidification of the seas are continuing, sea level rise continues, the ice caps are melting, the Siberian and North American tundra is melting, and just this morning I watched a news report about how they're having ravaging fires in northeastern Siberia, one of the coldest places on Earth. Heat waves in the Northern Hemisphere increase in frequency and severity. Massive droughts in the Middle East causing civil strife. Microplastics are causing mass die-offs of seabirds and other sea life, not to mention the catastrophe of COVID-19 global pandemic, which has killed millions of humans and has contributed to political destabilization in numerous countries. These joy rides to space are being lauded as the democratization of space, while the actual democracies on Earth are being undermined by misinformation, conspiracy theories, and authoritarian regimes. Humanity sees the billionaires and their new spaceships boldly going where only states have gone before and getting lost in the fantasy of someday, even for just a few minutes, escaping the reality of what we've done to this planet. The billionaires supply the daydreams, the masses get lost in it, and the reality of our self-destructive behavior remains undeterred. Necrophilia, the pathological embrace of that which is dead, has, to a certain degree, overcome much of humanity's biophilia, the love of that which is living. Biophilia as a way of being in the world seems to be atrophying under the weight of civilizational nihilism, as Fareed talked about, the inability to engage in a course correction. The one-time member of the Institute for Social Research, Eric Fromm, argued in his 1976 book, To Have or to Be, that necrophilia as a state of being and as a comprehensive worldview was one of the most dangerous conditions that modern humanity embraced. It is a totalizing lifestyle and mindset that privileges ownership, control, and possessiveness over a being with solidarity and experiential ethic. This necrophilic worldview instills in the individual a sense of worth, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, an interpretation of reality, and an orientation of action, much like a religion. However, unlike the Abrahamic religions, which rest on a humanistic core, regardless of how distorted they can be, the necrophilic worldview detaches the necrophile from moral concern for the living. It renders the cries of the suffering mute. It systematically marginalizes their appeals for mercy. It renders them invisible among the fantasy opium that is mass produced and mass consumed in civil society. The night side of modernity, the ugliness that is caused by modern society, while ominously present for billions of people around the world, fades into the background for the elites as necrophilia takes shape in the latest mass distraction. Unfortunately, this bourgeois icy coldness trickles down into the masses who idolize the image of the billionaire, the necrophile, the sociopathic leader. His ability to see the suffering of others as himself, which is at the core of the biophilic way of being, as well as the core of communicative rationality, becomes standard for the aspiring necrophile who longs to shed the burden of caring for others. We see that quite clearly in the latest pandemic in the US. In this sense, the aspirant not only absorbs the ideology of the ruling masters, but also their psychology. They too detach themselves from the burdens of biophilia, the burden of solidarity, the burden of care, and embrace a pathological commitment to self-interest at the expense of all others. A self-interest that is, of course, in terms of ecological reality, irrational. While this may appear as a sign of hyper-individualization, it is not. It is a mass trend that creates uniformity, not diversity, a universalizing trend towards the uncaring society. Part of the dynamic that has driven us towards necrophilia as the dominant mode of being is the lack of a substantive alternative within modern, mostly capitalist societies. Religion, especially the case in the West, Christianity, as Adorno and others wrote in The Authoritarian Personality, has been thoroughly neutralized by modern scientific, rationalistic, and materialistic society. Adorno writes, the shell of Christian doctrine, above all its social authority and also a number of more or less isolated elements of its content, is preserved and consumed in a haphazard way as a cultural good, like patriotism or traditional art. The secular materialist zeitgeist did not allow for the substantive theological and moral claims to be taken seriously. All that could remain within a society rooted in the metaphysics of what is the case is a faint sense that religious values and doctrines are good, correct, and authoritative, but even those ought not to be taken too seriously and never put into praxis in any socially significant way. While individual morality could be informed by religious morality, social morality was increasingly informed by the needs of the market and its handmaiden, the state. Although many of the Frankfurt School's predecessors had a hand in promoting materialist conceptions of the world, Feuerbach, Marx, Freud, Lenin, and others, the collapse of meaning into meaninglessness of materialism, as Fareed talked about, especially a formal materialism that could be functionalized by capitalism, was not adequately foreseen. It was the Antichrist, Nietzsche, of course, who foretold of the coming collapse of Western man into nihilism with the advent of modernity, a fate of meaninglessness that he too tried to escape with the apotheosis of the hero, the Übermensch. Nevertheless, between the ideology of the Übermensch and capitalist materialism laid the possibility of a worldview that took seriously the reality of material existence, which of course the Marxists have to do, while at the same time remain committed to materialism's original humanistic impulse. However, as secular materialistic societies became more and more capitalist societies, and the Ubermensch migrated from the great men of arts and philosophy to the great industrialists and their sycophants and imitators, the resource of meaning in the Western world became increasingly drained. The life of the spirit atrophied. Religion, which didn't fully disappear as some of the left-wing and bourgeois materialists had hoped, rather became a mere consolation within the increasing meaningless society, perpetuated predominantly by the political and cultural right. According to Max Horkheimer, philosophy too shared the same fate. But unlike religion, philosophy, even critical theory, as he writes, could not point to a future escape hatch or utopia wherein the plague of meaninglessness would be mitigated or negated. Horkheimer writes that critical theory has replaced theology, but found no new heaven to which it might point, not even a heaven on earth. But it is true that it cannot rid itself of that idea, which is the reason people always ask it for the way that could take them there, as if it were not precisely the discovery of philosophy that heaven, that heaven is none to which a way can be shown. As such, critical theory, just as the rest of philosophy, remains favete linguis, holding its tongue on the eschatological exit. Religion, on the other hand, especially in the West, either accommodated itself to capitalistic nihilism with a if you can't beat them, join them attitude, which produced the prosperity gospel, wherein the radical communistic Jesus of Nazareth was reconciled with the pathology of necrophilic accumulation, and this which consequently drained the gospels of their substantive social meaning. If the radical rabbi Jesus of Nazareth could be made to sanctify capitalist excess, greed, icy coldness, and territorial expansion, then Jesus of Nazareth became meaningless himself. However, when the dwindling numbers of Christians in the West remained true to the Sermon on the Mount, yet had the intellectual fortitude and honesty to see the reality of the post-Christian condition of secular capitalist modernity, Christianity became mere eschatological consolation, as Horkheimer pointed out, an opium to temporarily escape the pains of the totally dark world. Consolation Christianity is hardly even the shadow of the civilizational force that it once was. What's more, while the shell of Christianity remains appropriated for political purposes, its essence is all but evaporated, except among a few secular saints who have been able to translate its moral and ethical truths into secular language. And the last thing to be said, it is clear that in the West, we have advanced technologically beyond what much of our ancestors could have ever dreamed. Yet what is the price? What have we done to the earth to accomplish such miracles? What have we done to other peoples and civilizations to accomplish such leaps and bounds? Without falling into the antinomy of ethnomasochism, which is not helpful at all for any future causes, we in the West have to take a painful look at the state of our societies. While those societies are wealthy, they are predicated on poverty, both inner and external poverty. While they are technologically advanced, their families are falling apart. While they are democratic, democracy is undermined by spiritual despair and the increased pathologization and irrationalization of the life world. While they are scientifically advancing into areas of the cosmos never seen before by the human eye, they are losing sight of their neighbors next to them on earth. We've paid a high price for our secular modernity. We think that maybe we've done too much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dustin. It was really great. Thanks a lot. Now we are going to Michael Norton. Michael, are you around?
I am. Thank you.
But I don't see you. Why
You
I
don't.
see you?
I'm here.
Oh, yeah, now I see you. Great. Yes, Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I know it's a convention to say something really positive and flattering about the speakers who go before you in something like this. And I'm sure people often just do it simply by convention. I'm not accusing anybody here of doing that, but I don't normally congratulate people in that way because I think it's a little bit cliched. But honestly, I think I'm glad this is being recorded because it's absolutely fascinating. But I will definitely cheapen the currency of this video with what I'm going to say. Said and I have been talking about the human condition, it seems, since we met each other, but I didn't really know that because I was very unsure about what exactly Said meant by the human condition. And I just want to start off my contribution to this conversation with an anecdote which I shared with Said in the past. When my daughter was about 7 or 8 years old, she's into karate. She's a karate sensei. She's a fourth dan black belt in karate. She obviously gets her violent trends from her mother. But when my daughter was doing karate, one day she was down in the sports center, and I went to take her there. Different sports center. There was a different class, and half of the sports hall had been divided, and on one side was the children's karate class, and on the other side was a group of adults with Down syndrome playing football. And I was waiting with a group of parents for the children to come out. And as the children were coming from the karate class on one side of the sports hall, divided by a net, the Down syndrome, and I use this, it'll become clear, the Down syndrome adult football players, men and women, were also leaving the sports hall. As this guy was walking out, he locked eyes with me. I've got this tendency to make eye contact with people, which is a very bad characteristic. He made eye contact with me. He locked onto me. We locked onto each other. And he walked over. He put his arms around me. He was sweating like anything. And he gave me a big kiss on the front of my lips. All the other parents of the children retreated, looking horrified, collected their children, and exited as quick as they possibly could, because they might have obviously catch Down syndrome from this Down syndrome man who was kissing me on the face. When we got into the car, my daughter said to me, "Daddy, why was that man kissing you on the lips like that?" I said he was just being friendly. She says, I said, he looks like a man, but actually he's like a child. He's very childlike. And when I was talking to him, I said to him, "Did you enjoy the game of football?" He went, "Yeah." I said, "Were you a defender? Were you an attacker?" "I don't know." Were you going into this goal or going into this goal?" "I don't know." "Did you score?" "I don't know." But he really enjoyed it. So my daughter, she sat and thought for a while. She's about 7 years old. Those of us who've got kids, you know that your kids teach you so much. And she says to me, after a while, she said, "Daddy," she says, "I wish that more people in the world were Down syndrome." At my school, when they play football at lunchtime, there's always arguments. They start to fight. All the best ones are on one team. All the rubbish ones are on the other team. They have to always win. They have to always lose. And it's just not nice. I don't know why they need to be like that. So I think this speaks a little bit about where we are in the human condition. And the first thing I'd problematize was I'd say, how are we conceptualizing human in this notion of the human condition? So it seems to me that some, who counts as a human? So we have, it's a very pedantic, semantic thing to do, but it's always where I want to start. How do we define a human? And the contributions so far have been, very rich and thoughtful and thought-provoking and, about, we know that throughout history, throughout all of time, that who counts as a human depends. Some humans are counted more as a human and some people are less than human. So, we know it's men versus women, it's white people versus black or brown people, as they're called. It's old people versus young people. It's inverted commas, disabled people versus inverted commas, able people, whatever that means. And We know it's social class, we know it's patriarchy, we know it's colonialism, we know it's imperialism, all of these things. And to me, the fundamental problem is the way that we categorize human and the way that we treat through those categorizations and those labels, we feel justified and people accept that people can be treated less than human, not less than, less than human, just because of those categorizations. And I think that once we've created these hierarchies and we all have our place in that hierarchy, we don't want to give up our place. We don't want to give up the advantage that we have. So if there's 65 million people in the UK, okay, and there's say, I don't know, say 50 million or 45 million adults, we're all stratified in a certain way. And none of us, really want to give up what we fought so hard to do. We've been kind of socialized or programmed or conditioned to think that we deserve the place that we're in. And so we don't want to give that up. And that becomes part of the problem. So for me, these conflicts that we see, they're not accidental. These kind of global and local and domestic and national power relations are created intentionally. These conflicts that we have are created intentionally. In terms of the country I'm in, the kind of governing ethos or ethic of government is neoliberalism. And neoliberalism and the individualism that comes from that derives from, an economic system, a capitalist economic system that encourages us to actually see other human beings, not in terms of their just innate human dignity, but in terms of a balance sheet approach, as Bauman would talk about, what is their worth? How could I exploit them to make some more for me? And if they can't be exploited to make more money for me, well, they're disposable. We can just dispose of them and we don't need to worry about them. I remember when I was younger that we used to have this more collectivized, Mehdi was talking about this kind of, we need to think about a more collectivized approach as a kind of counterbalance to the individualism that we have today, which just separates us and divides us and just perpetuates those separations and divisions. And we used to see people who were, struggling, sleeping rough, unemployed, homeless, alcoholic, the kind of ills of modern societies, the kind of ways in which Farid was talking about, the ways in which the strategies in which people try to escape or find meaning in their lives in a kind of the kind of modern worlds we find ourselves in today. But today, when we look at each other and we see people who are not doing as well as we are, we don't see another human being. We see somebody who is a product of their own mistakes, and it's their individual mistake. It's not social structure. So there's no reason for me to have empathy for that person. And we've fallen for this. Another anecdote. We were on strike at the university a couple of years ago. And one of the senior professors was very militant about the strike. And I said to him, what are we going on strike for? Because prior to going into the university, I was a maintenance engineer in a factory for 15 years. And as far as I was aware, we were just going on strike for more money because we were being totally exploited. And we had some kind of solidarity in that movement. And he said, we want more money. And I said to him, well, how much money do we need? So he stopped. So I said, what kind of a house do you live in? And he said, well, I don't think that's relevant. And I said, well, I think it is relevant, humour me. So he lived in a £2.5 million house. I said, do you have children? He had 2 children. I said, did they go to state school or private school? They went to Eton, the so-called best private school in the UK. I said, what do they do? One had his own law firm, one was a businessman. I said, do you drive a car? Yes, of course. Do you drive a Fiat Panda, which is, I think, an okay car, but in this country, it's not considered an okay car. He said, I drive a Mercedes Benz. I said, do you have a holiday home in the south of France? He said, no, it's in the south of Italy, actually. So I said, look, I think we have enough money. Why don't we go on strike for the cleaners, the caterers, the security staff, all of the people, the administrators who do all the work actually, right? But get nothing. They're on casual contracts, 0-hour contracts, no holiday pay, no pension. Why would I do that? Why would I go on strike for them? So I asked him, and this is a professor of law, I asked him, had he ever read The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist, which is the book that started the socialist labour movement in the UK, okay? He'd never heard of it, yet he was militant about wanting to go on strike. So I think part of the problem is that in this kind of neoliberal context where we're so divided from one another and we don't see each other's humanity, we just see somebody who we are in competition with, that we want to be above in the hierarchy, and we want to keep down in the hierarchy because it somehow makes us feel better. I think these are some of the kind of major kind of problems that we have. In terms of the way forward, I think it's quite straightforward. I think, Justin, you articulated it beautifully. If I was reading a text, no doubt I would be able to do that. That's a joke. Medhi, absolutely. Rudolph, I can't believe that I've been able to hear you speak. It's amazing for me to hear you speak. But we have to be able to recognize people's inherent human dignity. We have to be able to see each other as human beings, not as women and men and black and white and old and young and able and disabled. That's what we have to do. And I think it's in our hearts. And I don't know how to explain that. I don't care what religion somebody is. I don't care what somebody believes in. I don't care what sexuality they are. I don't care what other human beings do. I don't care if they eat meat or don't eat meat. As long as I'm allowed to eat meat, that's okay with me, right? But it's about recognizing each other and trying not to judge each other. But I think what needs to be overcome is the fact that I think the existing world, the structures of this world have been created around fear. And we're fearful of the threat that others might be to us losing what we think we have. And as you said, Dustin, we have these riches, we have these cars, we have these houses, and yet we have nothing. And yet we're entirely lost from the most important thing, which is ourselves and each other. That's what we're lost from. And so I think that these conflicts, these competitions, these fears are created intentionally to divide us. And we need to resist that. Gilles Deleuze, who was a colleague of Foucault, he had a saying which was, thinking is resistance. And I think that once we can start to think about what's dividing us and the effects of that, we can start to imagine a different world. And when Medhi talked about revolution, it was interesting because when you said that word, Medhi, it was almost like an embarrassment for you to say that word because it's been so ridiculed, it's been so marginalized that a utopian person who actually sees the ills of the world and the consequences of the ills of the world, an empathetic person who sees humanity and the effects onto humanity by the existing social structure, he wants to whisper, we need a revolution. And he doesn't want anyone to hear him because he's embarrassed, because he thinks they're going to think he's naive and childish and stupid. And when I was talking previously, just running some ideas past Sayed, and Sayed, first of all, he said, what you're calling for, Mike, you're calling for a totally different world. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm calling for a different world. This world doesn't work. This world isn't broken. This world is the way it is by design. And we have the power and we can decide. And I'm not embarrassed to say that. I don't think if that's a cliched thing to say. But I think what people have done is people have internalized this idea that change is too difficult, it's too costly, it will take too long. And our vanity is that we want this change to happen within our lifetimes. We want to see this change. We're not prepared to make our small contribution. I don't mean the people here present, but we're not prepared. Our vanity is such that we want to see it now. And if it's not going to happen now, we can't be bothered. We're just going to get on with the game of accumulating as much as we can for ourselves. You may know that in Bristol last year, at the height of the pandemic, there was a protest in Bristol in England, and there was a statue of Edwin Colston, who was the slave trader, thrown into the harbour, okay? And one of my former students, who is now a colleague, she's a lecturer in the School of Education, she rang me up, she was screaming with joy, right? We're throwing the statue into the harbour. And I said, fantastic, I'm sure you're going to have a great afternoon, right? But be prepared to dig in, because there will be prosecutions, they're filming you, they're not getting involved in you, and don't think it's going to change anything, okay? The social structures that are creating inequality for Black and ethnic minority people are by design. And if throwing a statue in the water could change those social structures, you know, social structures would have changed a long time ago. So I said, start to look after each other, support each other, mobilize, form groups. It's going to take you a long time. It may take you all of your life, and she's 32 years old. It may take you the next 100 years, and you may not see that much progress, but you may get some progress. But you've got to be committed to that and not give up on what you believe in. 3 weeks later, oh, I can't be bothered with this. Move on to the next thing. So I think that you will get objections. People are people. They get this rush and they want to be part of this excitement. And I think you've just got to be committed to what you are committed to and just keep at it. And one thing that really kind of motivates me was a slogan from the student protests in 1968 in Paris. And one of the banners, you can watch a film on YouTube of these student protests. And one of the banners, which may be very familiar to you, I don't know, but it said, "Be realistic, demand the impossible." And I think that we need to be realistic and we need to demand what people think is impossible, because it isn't impossible. And I don't know if the way forward is through religion, but I think faith is a wonderful thing, but religions are not necessarily wonderful things. And I just think that a more kind of, I don't know, I mean, I'm a Catholic, but I think a more humanistic approach has got to be the way forward. And we have to believe a different world is possible. And we have to start by all of these analyses of what's wrong with the existing world. They become diagnostic analyses in our troubleshooting, not troublemaking endeavors. We're not troublemakers. Highlighting inequalities, injustices, discriminations, exploitations, the denigration and degradation of a human person and taking away that human's dignity, that is not troublemaking. That's troubleshooting. And I see this enterprise as an enterprise of troubleshooters that are just committed in any way that they possibly can to supporting human beings to live, to realize their full potentials, like we do with our children. Our children are all different from one another, but we don't love them any less and give them any less. Well, my parents did, because they were like that and they didn't really like me, but that's a separate story. When we talk about Freud, we might talk about that. But anyway, that's a joke. My parents were absolutely wonderful, as you can see. But here we are. The thing is, we just have to let our hearts rule our actions. But I do love this analysis you talked about, biophilia and necrophilia. But I actually want to believe that the necrophilics are the people who have been, contaminated, corrupted by this individualistic way of thinking. And I want to believe that they, in their true heart, know that that is not the right way to be. A final anecdote. Some of you may have seen a film called In the Name of the Father, and it was played by Daniel Day-Lewis, and he was depicting a man called Jerry Conlon. And Jerry Conlon was one of the Guildford Four. He was wrongly convicted for terrorist bombings in the UK in the 1970s, and this led to the setting up of our terrorist laws. Well, Jerry became a very good friend of mine before he died, and he was an ambassador for the project that I ran. And we went to visit one day the parole board to talk to them about how they deal with prisoners maintaining innocence. And the chair of the parole board started off by saying, you need to understand, guys, that we have to work on the basis that the courts are correct, that all prisoners are guilty. And I tried to point out to her that legal guilt doesn't mean factual guilt. And they could be legally guilty and factually innocent. And we have thousands of successful appeals every year in England and Wales. And some of these people who are saying they're innocent are innocent. And that will be proven in the future. So it was untenable, her stance. She wasn't really having any of that, she was giving the, I'm only following orders defense. It's in the statute, it's what I'm asked to do, it's what I get paid to do. I've signed the Official Secrets Act, whatever. Jerry started talking to her in a very, very different way. He was one of the most charismatic human beings I've ever met. And he said to her, he said, when you were a little girl, he said, I'm sure that your mum and dad loved you. And he said, and I'm sure they taught you what's right from wrong. And you must know that this is your job. But as a human being, you must know that there are some people in prison who are innocent. And you don't care about that because it's not your brother, it's not your sister, it's not your father, it's not your daughter, etc. But I believe that you know what's right and wrong. And I just urge you to do the right thing. She started to cry. She was a woman, she was in her mid-late 50s, and that broke her down. She resigned her post from the parole board for England and Wales, and she joined an organisation that I set up called Progressing Prisoners Maintaining Innocence as a trustee. So that's just one case. But I believe that you can get through to people if you try to get through to them on the level of their humanity. Another world is possible, guys. Although the one I'm in is pretty good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. It was really not only interesting, inspirational. To be honest, it's very difficult after all these beautiful and inspirational talks. I don't want to talk and deliver my speech. I would like to sit back and think and reflect upon what you guys have told, what Rudolf said, what Farid actually said about nihilism, and what Mehdi talked about, and what Dustin very eloquently put it, and what now you have actually explained. It's very difficult. But I try to be very short and very brief. The title of my talk is Critical Theory as an Existential Engagement in the World. I've been thinking about, talking about critical theory and trying to have roundtables, seminar, but is it really just a theoretical engagement, or is it just an academic like task or project I'm thinking of, or no, it's a way of trying to get into reality or the social reality or the existential reality of human self. But before getting into that, I don't have, first of all, let me say in the beginning, I don't have really a clear understanding or clear cut article here for you. Just I've been thinking and trying to formulate my thought on critical theory as an existential engagement. How do I understand critical social theory? Of course, I'm aware that critical theory as a school of social theory grew out of the theoretical endeavors of the Frankfurt School, who in turn were deeply indebted to the Kantian concept of critique. In addition, I'm aware that the critical theory in its Frankfurt School model is inspired by the emancipative interpretation of Judaism as a prophetic religion, and the founding theorists of the Frankfurt School were deeply immersed in the dialectics of the prophetic interpretation of religion and the new Kantian reading of Aufklärung. Having said this, I would like to reflect upon the possibility of relocating the act of critique beyond the categories of the Eurocentric vision of the critical theory. In other words, I would like to propose a non-Eurocentric vision of critique in relation to critical social theory. However, there are both historical and theological issues which may create some forms of synergy between a critical theory based on the soil of the Frankfurt School and a critical theory based outside of civilizational context of Eurocentric settings. Why do I suggest such a possibility? Let me start with the theological issue. Judaism as a Semitic form of perceiving the ontic aspects of reality has deep-seated commonalities with Islam. In both Semitic traditions, we see the strong presence of the prophetic emancipatory yearnings. This means that any critical endeavors based on the Semitic forms of emancipation would have deep theological commonalities, which one could not ignore. Then we have the global impact of Aufklärung, or the Enlightenment, where the Islamicate world along the European world was influenced by it in a total fashion. In other words, if we agree that the Frankfurt School was the result of the Kantian mood of conceptualizing the pure reason and the extension as well as the articulation and actualization of the prophetic emancipatory mood of being in the Semitic tradition, then it is not hard to trace the possibility of critique in non-Eurocentric critical social theories, such as the one presented by Ali Shariati, Sayyid Hussein al-Attas, Allame Jafari, Malcolm X, Franz Fanon, and etc. Once we agree that critique is possible in all forms of radical/emancipatory traditions, then the question could be on critical theory as an existential engagement in the world. In other words, how could critical theory be related to existential engagement in the world. The prime concern of the critical theory is on redeeming human beings from suppressions which are imposed upon them through the conditions which shackle them in various forms and shapes. Like Karl Marx, the subaltern school of critical social theory concerned themselves with the conditions, political, economic, and the societal, that allow for social change realized by way of rational social institutions. But the critical social theorists of the subaltern school have also argued that the human condition is not solely defined through the parameters of the material reality as expressed in political order, economic system, and societal parameters. On the contrary, being human is tantamount to be thrown away, as expressed symbolically in the story of the fall, or in Arabic, hubut. Here there are deep-seated similarities between Dostoevsky from the Christian tradition, Erich Fromm from the Judaic religion, and Ali Shariati from the Islamic tradition. All see the human condition as an ontological state which cannot be reduced solely into political, economic, and societal problematics. So when we think or reflect upon the human condition, although we should focus on political, social, and economic, but we shouldn't forget what is called the story of fall, or the state of being thrown away in the world, which creates anxiety, angst, and indifference maybe to others, or puts us in a form of alienation. So when we think about the human condition through the categories provided or thought through critical social theory, not just based on the Eurocentric vision, but in a global sense or inter-civilizational sense, then we might have categories and concepts which could enhance our position in order to find commonalities, in order to find the language to talk to each other, discuss, dialogue, and try to find what makes a condition more of a humane condition, not leading us to more alienating state of affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Syed Jawad. That was very interesting. At least, I always have to, because I'm in this bifurcated world of being very Western, but also another foot in the Muslim world, and so it's always interesting to be reminded to bring in that global, international, Western Islamic, in this case for me, perspective, where we can build those bridges. And I think you're right, when we do that, and we can interrogate and read each other's work, as Fareed talked about, Muslim scholars reading Western philosophy, but also Western philosophers, sociologists reading, in this case, the Muslim scholars. We can produce much better concepts and categories where we can understand the world and our problems in the human condition in a much more clear and comprehensive fashion. So, all right, well, let's open this up for questions and discussion.
Yes, if there are anybody who is who has a question, here we have, yes, go on, Farid.
Okay, I'd like to, to ask a question is very general, and it proceeds from what I think all of us have been saying, but Javad and Dustin, you were talking about concepts, ideas from different traditions, in this case Islamic and Western, and Professor Siebert, of course, was talking about the Frankfurt School. Dustin was talking about the Frankfurt School, and we've been talking about the human condition in the abstract. Michael had been talking about how to act, and this is what I want to put to you. It seems to me that in our respective, in all the traditions, the Western traditions, the Muslim traditions, the Hindu traditions, I think we have the terms, the concepts, the ideas that tell us what is wrong with the world. And I think we know what is wrong with the world. Maybe, and I guess I'm putting the question to you, is it more a problem of how we need to act in the world? And I'm thinking, because many of us have been talking about the Frankfurt School. Lukács, in his theory of the novel, he, I think in the preface, he was critical of the German intelligentsia, and I think he was referring specifically to the Frankfurt School. He talked about, and I find this very funny, he talked about them taking up residence in Grand Hotel Abyss, which he describes as a beautiful hotel equipped with every comfort on the edge of an abyss of nothingness, of absurdity. The daily contemplation of the abyss between excellent meals or artistic entertainments can only heighten the enjoyment of the subtle comforts offered. This is a quote from Lukács. So basically, he was saying that the members of the Frankfurt School thought of the suffering of the world, but kept themselves safe from those sufferings and did not act. And I think when I look at social science, social scientists, scholars, intellectuals in the social sciences and humanities, there's much critical and creative thinking, but and there's potential to influence people and bring about change, the kind of change that Michael was talking about. But as academicians, most of us don't play a significant role in shaping public opinion, right? In spite of all the ideas that we may have. So, to me, this is the problem. Not that we lack the ideas of what is wrong with the world, but what can we actually do? First of all, most of us don't. Well, I'm saying most academics are not interested in engaging the world, are not interested in conscientizing people, are not interested in doing the kinds of things that Michael, did with respect to the 32-year-old woman you were talking about just now, and I think other examples you gave. Most academics are not doing that. So shouldn't we, talk about what actually needs to be done rather than the ideas that, yeah.
Thanks.
Otherwise, we're all residing in the Grand Hotel Abyss. Lukács said.
And I think it's very attractive, isn't it? I mean, I've been at the University of Bristol now for almost 30 years as an undergraduate student, postgraduate student, member of staff, never moved away. But there are very, very few colleagues that I socialize with or see outside of the university in any capacity. And it seems that, the general criticism of academics is they live in their ivory towers. I suppose, Farid, you know, you're talking about the Grand Hotel on the Abyss is in the ivory tower, the subsidized bar, the subsidized restaurant. Just stay with your own like-minded people. Keep saying what's wrong with everything, you know, and just do nothing about it. I don't want to criticize them. I genuinely think that those people, most of those people I know who are academics, and I don't want to even put a label on them because in one sense, I'm an academic, but I don't see myself as an academic. I just see myself who is, I work at the university and it's a good job for me because I get paid to talk. And I like to find out about things, but I'm not defined by that job. But I think that there is research that's shown that doctors, lawyers, academics, police officers, nurses, like this, they define themselves, their identity is their occupation. And they have a certain way of being that they think aligns or fits or with this identity they think they should have, somehow aloof, a little bit detached, analyzing things, not getting their hands dirty. But I also think that they don't really know how to get involved. There's a general lack of confidence, I think, among the academics that I've met over the last 25, 30 years, or people who identify as academics. And they go to me, how did you get involved in talking to the government or talking to the parole board or talking to the judges or talking to prisoner groups or whatever? I say they contact me or I just contact them. Hi, would you like to talk? Can I help in any way? It's not difficult. I once met some academics in the UK and I was starting to do my research on wrongful convictions, miscarriages of justice. And there wasn't much literature. And two guys, wonderful guys, Nobles and Schiff they're called, Richard and David, and they had written a book called Understanding Miscarriages of Justice. So I contacted them and said, can I come and meet you and talk to you about your work? I'm also starting to research on miscarriages of justice. So I went to meet them. We had a lovely afternoon, had some nice food, nice cup of tea. And I said to them, so who do you know? Which victims of miscarriages of justice do you know? You talk about understanding them. They had never met a victim of a miscarriage of justice. They'd never met one. So I said, why not? And they said, well, we just don't know how you would go about it. So I said, well, hold on. I picked up my phone. I rang up Paddy Hill from the Birmingham 6 case. I said, do you want to meet these academics in London? Yes. And then they're meeting them. And then they understand something different about it. They understood something really important, but quite abstract. And it's translating these abstract ideas into the world, which people were not really doing. I don't know what the answer is to your question, Farid, but yes, unless academics get involved in the world with the knowledge that they have and the products of their research, how is anything going to change?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. A couple of things. I'd like to, back up what you just said, Michael. When we did our book on Fanon, Syed Javed and I, for me, it was a matter of, I wanted to include someone very important who was an interpreter of Fanon, but not only theoretical interpretation, but also someone who lived a Fanonian type of existence. So I simply sent a letter to Mumia Abu Jamal in prison. and Mu sends something back and he's like, yes, of course I want to contribute. Of course I lived out Fanon's philosophy in the Black Power movement, in the Black Panther movement. And yes, that's what landed me in prison. as a political prisoner in the United States. So, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's a matter of just taking that initiative and also being amazed just how easy it is to connect the theoretical work we're doing to the praxis. But, and oftentimes, you know, on the other hand, you know, the theoretical work in some kind of way is the praxis too for a lot of us. I remember an interview of Herbert Marcuse when someone referred to him as a revolutionary. And he said, no, I write books that clarify what's going on in the world, that so people can understand the problems, understand the possibilities that are beyond the problems, but don't call me a revolutionary. The revolutionaries are in the jungle right now, liberating these countries, right? They're the ones suffering. I'm sitting here in California, in San Jose, in a nice house, teaching at a major university, right? So, and it was that realization that I'm contributing, but I'm not the boots on the ground, right? So maybe there's this division of labor in many ways.
I think that you know, Orwell said that speaking truth can be a very radical act, and when you're speaking truth to power in the kind of research that we do, I mean, it is a threat to power. I mean, I said earlier that, you know, I think we're troubleshooters, not troublemakers, but we're not seen as troubleshooters to those in the established positions of power, because we are casting a light on the, you know, injustices of the existing power structures. I remember when I first got my job and I was going into work one day and the Queen was visiting the University of Bristol, right? I don't mean Freddie Mercury, I mean the actual Queen, right? And I was walking into work and I always got to my office about 7:30. And I was going in there, nobody was in the entire building, only the cleaners. And they had, you know, like MI5 and military police with machine guns and things like this. And I was walking into my office and I just had my briefcase. And this military police officer, I don't know who he was, with a machine gun said to me, "You don't have anything in that bag that we need to worry about, do you?" And I said to him, "Well, actually, this is a munitions factory," right? He stepped back. I said, "What I do in this office, I create counter discourse, right? I try to give voice to the voiceless, to subjugated, to kind of unearth these subjugated discourses that Foucault talks about." And all of a sudden, I'm up against the wall and the bag is emptied onto the ground. And all he can see is pens, and I have a fetish for stationery, right? Well, I've got a fetish for stealing stationery. So I just, every time I see free pens or post-it notes or sellotape, it went in my bag. And he poured it on the ground and he's looking and he says, "I can't see anything." I said, "Yeah, it's invisible to your eyes, right?" And he said, he walked out, he says, "Academics are weird," right? I thought it was fantastic. But I genuinely think that is how we change the world. We are munitions factories. We are creating these counter discourses. Some of us, of course, not all academics are. Academic can be critical in defense of the existing system. And, you know, I'm writing at the moment, the two books I have, I don't have many books in this office, but the two books I'm reading at the moment are these two books by you two guys, right? And, you know, there are house Negroes who defend the system and don't want the system to change because they're comfortable in the Grand Hotel on the edge of the abyss. And, you know, we have to find a way to even convince those house Negroes that this is not the best life that they could have. They may feel it is, and they don't want to give up something that they feel, you know, this security that they have. One of the things I wanted to say, and then I'll shut up, is I didn't talk about love. And I think that the way forward has to be love. Just like we love our children if they're gay or vegetarians, or they bring a boy home who's a different ethnicity, or whatever, or they, inverted commas, are not perfect and they don't do well in school and things like this. I mean, love is the antidote to all of this, not judging people, accepting people, understanding people, and just loving people. You know, being fascinated, amazed by people, supporting people. That's the antidote. I would like to write a book, and I have the title, but I don't have anything else. You know, if love is not the answer, you're asking the wrong question. So I think that, you know, you don't need to read the book. My book titles are like country and western songs. If you hear the title of the song, you don't need to hear the song. You know, you left me with 5 kids in a broken down shack, but I still love you, right? You know what the song's about, right? So for me, it can only be being amazed in this world, not wanting more than what you need and wanting to help other people to be the best that they can be. That's all it can be. It's not difficult. But fear gets in the way. Competition, threat, divides. He thinks he's better than you. They want what you've got. There's enough to go around. Mehdi mentioned earlier, I can't remember the astronomical amount, but how much it costs per minute for Bezos to go to space. And I read somewhere the other day that to actually feed the world would take $3 billion, right? We destroy food to inflate the price. And we want to spend, we've found, I don't know where the money came from, there must be a magic money tree, right? We've found hundreds of billions of dollars for the pandemic that we didn't have before the pandemic. These are political choices. The conflicts that we have in the world are political choices. And we have to make a choice. Which side of the line are we going to be on? And it's as simple as that.
Thanks a lot. Any other question? Anybody has any question? If not, we are actually running out of time. Yes, go on.
You're muted, Fareed.
No, I mean, I have a question, but Mehdi, let Mehdi go first because he put his hand up.
Oh, I was just going to say a couple of things. One is, you know, when we talk about social problems in this country, those who really can think in terms of the political structure will kick the bombs out, throw the bombs out. So in other words, within the structure, you know, they're trying to fix some of these problems. So the whole idea that this commodified educational institution can really change the world, it just, I don't think it's possible unless we restructure the whole educational institutions. You know, we have turned it into a commodity. You got money, good for you, you buy it, we'll give you a piece of paper. If you don't have money, that's just too bad. That's one thing. But in other parts of the world, when of course that, you know, it is individuals are not allowed really to demonstrate and to you know, peacefully request maybe, you know, for the changes to occur for a better condition, then obviously it's going to explode in their faces. You know, the system can leak, and then it's all caught by surprise. But I think that in terms of changing the world, I don't know if it's up to me, the individual, but I think as long as I am looking at the world through prism of my interest, it's not going to happen. I think we're all alluded to that individualism, that sickness that is taking over the world and is beginning to spread. By the way, just briefly, and when I mentioned about water scarcity, that is, we're going to see more wars over drinking water. Just to point out that there are about 20,000 desalination plants around the world, okay, that they take the ocean water and sweeten it and then provide it to the consumers. And of those, of course, there are about a big chunk of them are in the around Persian Gulf area. Saudi Arabia, I think, has the largest in the world, followed by United Arab Emirates and followed by, you know, a couple of others. But even that, notice though, that is not available to everybody. So how do we go about really democratizing basic needs? You know, access to basic needs it should not be based on your race, your ethnicity, your geography. It should be based on what you need really. And as long as we don't address that, we're going to end up feeding the wants of these people around the globe that it seems that there's no end in sight for them, you know, in terms of accumulation. That's all I have to say.
Thanks. Okay, come on, Ferdy.
Yeah, no, just back to the issue of academics, right? Yeah, as Michael said, it's not difficult to be engaged with what's happening in the world, right? You have to just be interested in it, and you have to want to do it, and then people will come to you, or you go to them. But I think the problem is that aside from those who actively involved in defending inequalities and injustices and all that, you also have the majority whose works are actually irrelevant to change. I mean, I can think, for example, of quantitative work in sociology and economics and geography, which is, as you know, statistically significant, but substantially not significant, not important. Um, and these are our colleagues um, who are, publishing, hundreds of papers, literally hundreds of papers. I mean, they publish 20, 30 papers in a year. Of course, these are co-authored papers. And, there are slight variations from one quantitative study to another. But this is the work that they're doing. So anyway, that is, that is something difficult to change. But for those who want to be involved in change, there's another problem. The problem is the lack of ability to translate theoretical, abstract work in terms that can be understood by by non-academics. I think this is a problem, right? I mean, for example, I can read the economic and philosophic manuscript of the Paris manuscripts of Marx. Those few pages on alienation are very difficult for lay people to understand, for non-academics to understand. So I should have the ability to translate it in a way that my grandmother can understand, or or as Malcolm X said, tell it to me like I'm a 6-year-old, right? And if you cannot tell it to me like I'm a 6-year-old, chances are you don't understand it yourself. And I think what I'm getting at is that we need to, I think, teach our students not only the ideas, but how to translate these ideas into everyday terms, with examples, with illustrations, so they really understand these things. And I find using movies and novels a great way. Like when you talk about alienation, you talk about the Matrix, people can understand, the students can really understand what alienation is. They can sort of feel it, rather than just remaining at the abstract philosophical level of Marx's, text. So translating the ideas in a way that the students understand, and then talking about how those ideas can be used as a basis of conscientizing people, non-academics, people who are directly impacted by inequalities and other kinds of difficulties. And how does that lead, how can it or should it lead to agitation? How can it lead to, depending on the context of your country or society, can it lead to some kind of reform? Does it lead to, a revolt? I think this is the way that we need to talk to students. Otherwise, the ideas just remain, with us, and they may be interesting, but they're not going to result in any changes. And changes can be, piecemeal. They don't have to be revolutionary changes. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if a few students get conscientized and then start an NGO and work to bring about change at a small level, that's already something very good. It's better than nothing. But I think our teaching, the way we teach, has to change.
Yeah, it has to be critical pedagogy, doesn't it? I mean, the problem is that, especially in a university like mine, a lot of the students, they don't come from oppressed backgrounds. They come from very privileged and wealthy and entitled backgrounds. So, but you'll be surprised when you start to actually speak in a way about trying to highlight oppression and how the world is unfair, that even the entitled privileged students who come from these backgrounds, they know it's wrong. it's not their fault they're born into families with wealth and privilege, and they've been brought up with advantages. But precisely because they have those advantages and opportunities, they maybe don't need to worry about getting a job, and they can genuinely be part of trying to make the world a better place because they're not burdened by those things that we all have to worry about, getting a job and paying our rent, etc. So I think that, I learned over the years, I used to be a little bit kind of, I suppose, anti-privilege when I first started teaching. I had a particular view about people, but it's not the fault of wealthy people or children that they're born into wealthy families, no more than it's the fault of a poor child who's born into a poor family. And we have to believe that knowledge, right, is powerful, because if it wasn't, why would there be all these efforts with, to control the mass media, to control, the populations through the mass media, if knowledge wasn't the thing that can break through this? How people think determines how people feel, determines how people act. And we have to change how they think and feel, and then we will change how they act. So it has to be an emotional education as much as just an intellectual education. They have to identify with what we're talking about. And I think everybody here does that, just through all the other conversations that we've had so far. These are academics for humanity here.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, especially with the power of knowledge. I mean, just right now, if those of you outside of the U.S. are following what's going on here, there is this just pathological uproar against critical race theory going on right now. And meaning critical race theory is basically, legal theory from the 1970s on how, legal structures that were put into place through the course of American history, the consequences of which are still with us and privilege some people and oppress other people, right? And there is an uproar against it because for them, it's, I don't want my kids being taught that because then they'll hate their country, so, which isn't the point of it. The point is to identify problems and to say, oh, look, don't you think all American citizens should be treated equally? I mean, they are citizens, but I think you're right, though. If that wasn't a powerful thing, such a powerful thing, that if you grow up in a privileged background, you might not ever really see that, right? Because you're blind to it, but now you're exposed to it by a good professor who says, no, I mean, look at this. This isn't a racial thing. This is a structure that was put in place at a certain point in time for a certain reason. And when you realize that, you start to say, well, my good friend, who might not look like me, but he's my brother, or she's my sister, consider them that. Why should they be treated any differently? And so I start to have this, even if it's a small, even if it's symbolic revolt against the status quo, but that's the power of simply knowing that there's a problem there.
But have you noticed, Dustin, how the system actually is trying to co-opt that? It is really a group of people against other groups, for and against this critical race, and government sort of. And I think that is really part of, power of ideology, the supremacy of ideological state. That it looks at the critical points, the critical issues, and then looks and analyzes to see how it can co-opt that in order to prevent any kind of serious damage to the structure. Because after all, maintaining the structure is of critical importance. It is the system that must be maintained. The hell with the individual, we really don't need them, dime a dozen.
Right.
So I think there is, and we've always experienced that, I think. And in terms of, this vaccination, again, it's people against people, right? The system is waiting to see in what way it can really utilize that to its own advantage. I mean, I don't mean that as a negative, sinister thing, but the fact of the matter is that the very core of the system does not relinquish. That's why we have difficulty. As long as educational system continue to reproduce that view of the system and their environment, then they got it made. You see, And that's why it's so critical for us, really, because our job is not just to teach them a few concepts, to memorize a few concepts and then test them. It is to actually make agents of change in society. At least that's what I think our job is. But the fact that we have a serious force working against us. The media, the government, religion even. Just look how religion is now taking side, really. You know, here's a guy, Catholic priest, who's opposing opening up a soup kitchen in his neighborhood because there are a couple of pizza joints that, you know, are going to be affected, going to lose. And I mean, look at the logic. Market, let there be market, right? Let there be light, let there be market as a solution to the problem. So it is all capitalism, you know, the bourgeois mentality, I don't know, the wealth. God, if you've made it, you know, God has been good to you. Therefore, you know, nobody should be able to challenge that. And so it is a very powerful, you know, thought process. It's a very powerful and alienating, you know, social environment, political, economic, intellectual environment. Anyway.
I see Professor Rudolph is very quiet.
No, what I was going to say was that Stephen Lukes was really helpful in trying to help us to understand that, you know, if you kind of reduce power to its kind of simplest kind of way of expressing it, it's getting people to do what you want them to do. And I think it was a second or third dimension of power, which was you've got to kind of make people think that what you want them to do, they're doing it because they want to do it. And that's that's why we govern inverted commas by consent. And that's why it's so important to try to contain, to try to prevent these counter discourses from actually, you know, becoming prevalent and prevailing, because, you know, we don't want these things challenging them. So I think that, you know, we cannot underestimate, you know, maybe they'll reintroduce martial law and the guns will come back on the street. That's fine. I want the society that I live in, certainly, to live up to its mission statement. The mission statement is we treat everybody as an individual, we recognize everybody's human dignity, we treat everybody fairly, the system is just. The reality can't be anything further away from those things. And that's what we try to expose. We're trying to expose these voids and gaps between the rhetoric and the reality, the theory and the reality. And that's what we do. And then those people who do that and do that well, they end up losing their careers, they lose their jobs, they lose their livelihoods. You know, that's how powerful this stuff is. And if we're not prepared to lose our jobs, okay, we are just house Negroes by another name. We're just pretending that we want change and we want a fairer, more just, more equal society. But we don't. I mean, I know so many Christians, people who identify as Christians. They are prominent people within the community. They walk around wearing a cross. But they're not Christians in the way that I would see them as Christians. They go so far, but they don't go far enough. They tip the boat, but they won't tip the boat over. And what we're talking about here tallies with the book I'm writing now. About if we want to change the world, we have to tip the boat over. So, you know, these people who say that they want change, but they're just paying lip service to that, you know, we've got to kind of just not get bogged down by debating with those people and trying to justify ourselves to those people. Those people will never understand. We have to be talking to the people, the majority of the population. Honestly, Farid, you know, you don't need to read the Communist Manifesto to understand that if you're working in a factory, you're getting shafted, right? When I first went to Bristol University, and I didn't leave school with any GCSEs or any qualifications, and I went to university as a mature student, I was being taught Marxism by Theo Nichols. And Theo Nichols was telling us about false consciousness, a very famous Marxist professor. And he said to us, you know, the workers, they've all got a false consciousness. And I put my hand up, I'm 32, 33 years old. No, we don't. No, we don't have a false consciousness. We have to do the blinking job because we have no money, we have no choice. But we know when we're on our machines that the managing director is playing golf and we're getting peanuts and he's living in a mansion with servants. We don't have a false consciousness about it. We just don't have any other choice at the moment. And there was this, I felt there was this patronizing working class people, elitist academics, thinking that we don't understand about our oppression when we are the victims of that oppression. We don't need a middle class professor to explain to us oppression who's never experienced oppression. So I think we need some humility from academics as well, to not patronize and be condescending to people who are the victims of oppression, because they may not know what these words mean. We shouldn't be talking in those words. We should be just saying, you're being exploited. I know you're being exploited. How can I help you in your struggle to fight against the exploitation or the injustice or the inequality or the discrimination? And then just be led by the victims of oppression and inequality. Don't try to lead. Offer yourself to them. Create counter discourses. Give them ammunition. Help them in their fights. I lose money every month being an academic. I have an easy life, an easy job, no doubt about it. But I lose money every month. It was a conscious choice to be an academic rather than to be a property developer, because I wanted to actually be able to assist and give voice to people who don't have a voice. It's a conscious political decision. But a lot of my colleagues, that's not why they're academics. They're academics because they were good at school, they went to university, they didn't know what else to do, and they just ended up academics. They do research on anything just to keep their job. They'd write about anything just to tick a box.
That's the market mentality, right? You got to produce something in return for your wages. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we're got a few more minutes left, and I know Dr. Siebert wanted to make a comment.
Yes, I'm listening and I'm learning, and I'm very grateful for this. I think it's very easy for a professor or theoretician to know if he's effective or if he's heard or not, and that is to get a police file. If you have a police file, then you really know that you hit the barbed wire. And I always taught my students that they should know the system well before they act in order not to make unnecessary sacrifices. So when you read your police file, then you know how much the police has understood and how much the upper classes have understood and how effective you are. So that is a good test, I think. A police file is a good test.
Can I also add, that's a very interesting point. I also want to add that another way of knowing that you're effective is that if you're banned, right? And I'm very proud to say that I'm banned from at least one country. I've been, banned from entry, and I'm in my own country. I'm banned from speaking at a couple of universities. And when I tell this to people, they sympathize with me, and I tell them, look, I'm very proud of that because it means that I must be saying something right. So in addition to having a police file, being banned is also an indication.
But in some cases, you can't even talk about your police file. That will get you in trouble. So
yeah, that's right. That's right.
You don't have to mention any country in particular.
In Islamic tradition, there is a saying that if you cannot change things with your hands physically, right? At least change with your mouth, with your tongue. And if you cannot change with your tongue, at least change it in your mind. And I think that sort of, it says something about your heart. it says something about the condition in different countries. And I tell this to my students. In some countries, like in your country, in the US, in the UK, there's a lot you can do even physically. You know, you can protest, you can demonstrate, you can engage in civil disobedience and so on. But on the other hand, there are countries like my country where it is rather difficult. We do have a great deal of freedom to speak, but civil disobedience is more difficult. You know, you're more under threat of losing your job and so on. And yet other countries where even to say something, you can be put in jail,
Yep.
right? So there you have to act in a way that, you know, you have to maybe, you can speak, you know, to students in closed circles, you can conscientize people, but more than that might be very difficult. So we have to choose the way we engage in battle depending on the context.
Harry, now you understand why I have a very good art.
Sid,
Now you know the reason why I become a Sufi, and I'm very much introvert.
By the way, you know, was it in Quran they say 100 times it is ordered or told people to, you need to think, you need to reason 100 times, you know, the mind. So when you talk about praxis, it doesn't have to be a particular philosophical school that can provide you with the abstract context for your action. Faith can also be that framework in which you can act, move forward, right? If it's based on thinking and reasoning, and you know, this whole notion that faith and reason don't go hand in hand is just bogus to me. It doesn't make any sense at all. It depends how you approach it.
when I first started doing research on prisoners who maintain innocence, people used to write to me from prison, and I ended up like just collecting their names, making a spreadsheet. And when I had 100 names, I decided to make a questionnaire and to send the questionnaire into the prison and ask the prisoners about, you know, what were the challenges, what were the barriers to making progress and being released if you're a prisoner maintaining innocence. And there's lots of things, but mainly they have to do offending behavior courses to demonstrate they've reduced the risk of reoffending. And these offending behavior courses, they require an admission of guilt and a full and frank account of the crime. And prisoners maintaining innocence say, I can't do that. I didn't do this crime. So they're stuck in prison indefinitely. So I'm working with people at the moment who were given a 12-year sentence by the court, and they've been in prison more than 40 years already. And nobody even knows who those people are, right? So anyway, caused a lot of trouble. The university was contacted by the Ministry of Justice and said, we want to see Dr. Norton's questionnaires because he hasn't had permission from the Ministry of Justice to do this research. Well, I refused to let them see my questionnaires. They said that they didn't exist. And I didn't realize that inadvertently, I had somehow been able to get around the normal permissions required to do research with serving prisoners. Because they had written to me directly and I had a personal relationship with them, I can write to them and ask them anything I want. I don't need any permission. They contacted me. Anyway, I was invited down to London and there was a Chatham House Rules meeting. And at this meeting, you're allowed to say what was said, but you're not allowed to say who said it, right? So I went down there and there was 12 men in a room, all men, and representatives from the Home Office, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the Prison Service, prison psychology, etc., the full gamut. And I was sat there and they asked me to give a presentation on my research. But they had met with me because they read the research and they wrote in the prisoner newspaper they were going to meet with me because the prisoners were all using this research in their arguments trying to get parole. I'm a victim of the parole deal, they were saying. So anyway, I said, I'm not going to give you a PowerPoint presentation of the research. because you know what the research is. Come on, why am I here? And there was total silence. And they were sat behind these tables, and I was sat on a chair in a huge room, no table in front of me, just sat like that. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I said, come on, is somebody going to speak? Nobody spoke. And I said, guys, look, I've come down here today in good faith. I've paid for my own train fare because the University of Bristol won't give me any money. I've put my best suit on, right? And I'm giving you a very valuable thing. I'm giving you a day of my life, right? And I could spend this day with my kids. I could spend this day with my wife. I could spend this day with myself. So why am I here? And then one of these people said, and I assume speaking for all, we have done our homework on you, Dr. Norton. You are an enemy of the state. So I said, some people would be very proud of that title. I said, but to me, it shows how ignorant you are. And if this was your assignment, homework assignment for one of my courses, you'd fail the course. I said, in a former life, I used to be a maintenance engineer in a factory. And if somebody came to the maintenance department and I was drinking a cup of tea or reading a book, I didn't say, go away, you enemy of the maintenance department. I just went out and fixed whatever was broken. And I'm here as a critical social scientist, reporting to you what's wrong with the system or a problem with the system. You claim to want to encourage trust and confidence in the criminal justice system. Well, as long as you've got these problems, that's not going to happen. So you are the enemies of the state, not me. But they didn't fall for that. And I think, to kind of just say something to what Rudy said, I think that there's quite a big file on me from that moment to this moment, and I think it's getting bigger.
Well, we are definitely in good company. Effective pedagogues. Excellent. Well, we are out of time, and before Zoom cut us off, I'd like to thank you all for joining this discourse today. It was very interesting, very enlightening, and hopefully we can do some more of them over the course of the year or so. But so thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. So
Excellent.
with that, be well, change the world, and let's do it in some fast fashion.
Right.
Great.
Strive for a
you.
police
Take
record.
care.
All right, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you soon.